Good morning. The word of the Lord from Mark chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. In this bustling synagogue of Capernaum, an encounter unfolds between Jesus of Nazareth and this man possessed by an unclean spirit. The atmosphere is charged with anticipation. One thing you might want to know, just an aside for whatever it's worth, this isn't the only story of its kind like this, and not even of Jesus. Even later in the Gospels, you find out that there are other people walking around in synagogues casting out spirits that are not Jesus. This was a very trendy time to have spirits being cast out. There were lots of healers traveling around in Jerusalem and Judea and Galilee casting out spirits, and everybody kind of wanted to see one of these showdowns. If you remember back a decade or so to the height of those dance mobs that would break out suddenly in the middle of public, and you'd see these videos of these flash mobs, and you watch these videos and you think, that'd be kind of cool to see in person sometime. That's how everybody felt about these casting out of unclean spirits about this time. Okay, they were the flash mob of its time. Everybody kind of wished that they'd show up to church and they'd see one of these unclean spirit showdowns. Okay, whenever they were all amazed, when they were all just eyes fixed on this moment, this was a heightened moment of anticipation to see who's going to win. It was almost like a wrestling match, because sometimes some of these people walking around casting out unclean spirits lost. They didn't always win. Even in the Gospels, you have the disciples try at one point to cast out an unclean spirit, and they lose. In Acts, you have somebody try to cast out an unclean spirit, and they get beat to an inch of their life. These heavyweight supernatural wrestling matches that took place in public were a really big deal, and everyone wanted to see who was going to win. Was it Jesus or this spirit? And that was a real question. We read this story and we predict the outcome. Jesus is going to kick out the demon. He's going to perform his little exorcism and everything's going to be fine. We know how this story ends. Everybody there wanted to know what was going to happen next. Heightened anticipation was all you could find. And the question was, who's going to win? The atmosphere charged with all this anticipation, this unclean spirit, as if startled, cries out with the most interesting question of the day. "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" What a weird thing to say. What have you to do with us? It's not just awkward to say out loud because the words are in weird places and you could kind of clean this up and make it more modern. It's not awkward just because this seems like weird Bible talk. It's so awkward because this entity, this spirit, has now gone into passive mode in its own vocabulary. That's what makes this so weird. It's not, "What are you going to do to me?" It's "What have you to do with us? What are you here for?" And in this recognition that Jesus is the doer and this spirit is just what is going to be acted upon, you get this awkward question. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? And this question sticks with us. It reverberates across time. It echoes into the very depth of our own hearts, because this question is most awkward because you can ask yourself the same thing, can't you? What do we expect of Jesus? What do we expect Jesus to do with us? What if we really are just the passive objects that he acts upon? What is he here to do with us? To understand the weight of that question, we dive into this story in Mark 1, and Jesus enters this synagogue and immediately captivates the audience with his teaching. Said no teacher ever, right? He immediately captures the audience's attention with his teaching. That's weird. You have to acknowledge that that's weird. It's characterized by an authority that astonishes. Said no teacher ever. This guy has an authority in a classroom that doesn't come from a principal or a threat to call home. There's no other authority in the room except his very teaching itself. It's captivating. This unclean spirit recognizes that weirdness. It knows that authority can come from one place and questions the very essence of the presence of Christ in that place. That encounter is such a pivotal moment. It reveals Jesus' divine authority, not over his classroom, but over everything, even over the spiritual forces. His authority is so much that it is spilling over into the unseen realm around them. His authority. It's everywhere. It's unmaskable. This unclean spirit's question serves as a portal into the hearts of all who have any sort of preconceived notion of who Jesus should be. This question is not merely some desperate plea from a tormented soul. It is a challenge to the expectations held by both the possessed and the onlookers. Everyone in the room wanted to know the same answer to the same question. This unclean spirit just happens to be the one brave enough to ask it. Everyone in the room wants to know, what is somebody who has that much authority doing in a place like this? And what are they going to do with a person like me? Because when you come face to face with that kind of authority, it truly is terrifying. And I think everyone in the room, not just the unclean spirit, was terrified. They were glad somebody asked the question. It just happened to be this crazy guy with a demon. Because only a crazy guy with a demon would ask this kind of authority, what are you here to do with us? What do we expect from Jesus? And is what we expect from Jesus in alignment with what he truly is? You see, the contrast between the expectation of the unclean spirit and the expectations that we hold today, I think, is striking. This spirit in Mark's account seems to anticipate destruction. What else could he expect except destruction from this Jesus of Nazareth? He projects his own fear onto the person of Jesus. And it prompts us to ponder, what do we expect from Jesus? Do we expect destruction? Sometimes, don't we? When we feel extra guilty, we expect destruction. Or do we expect deliverance? Or do we expect judgment? Do we expect compassion? Or perhaps something else entirely? What do we expect from Jesus? There's a wonderful book that I haven't mentioned in at least 5 minutes. A little bitty thing. It's not academic at all. It's very entertaining. Okay, it's not N.T. Wright. It's called Imaginary Jesus. It's got a bit of a gut punch at the end that'll make you cry. Just warning. But it's a wonderfully funny book, really, about this guy who walks around and he can see the Apostle Peter. And the Apostle Peter takes him on a journey through Seattle, where he encounters all these different versions of Jesus. And all these different versions of Jesus exist because they're all the different versions of what people expect Jesus to be like. So he finds Magic 8-Ball Jesus, who only speaks in answers you find on a Magic 8-Ball. Yes, no, maybe, I don't knows. That's all he gives you. He encounters a Jesus who wants you to have everything you've ever wanted. It's the health and wealth Jesus, and he runs a pyramid scheme, okay? He encounters all these different kinds of Jesus. There's a Republican Jesus, a Democrat Jesus, everything in between. There's even a men's retreat Jesus, which only eats beef jerky and tears phone books in half with his bare hands, okay? There's a Jesus for everybody, and they're all not Jesus, right? And he has to sift through all of these fake versions of what people expect Jesus to be like in order to find the real thing. And only after he gets rid of all his expectations can he find the real Christ. When he's willing to let go of all the things he expects Jesus to be, can he find who Jesus really is. And I think that's so absolutely always been true. You see, the fundamental anthropological problem with deities is who looks like who. It's been the problem from the very beginning. It doesn't matter which religious system you look at. Every religion has always had the same exact problem. Eventually, the deity who is supposed to tell humans what they are, eventually the people start telling the deity who the God is. In other words, the people are supposed to look like God, but eventually the people start making God look like the people. We've always done it. Always, always, always. In every single religious system that's ever existed, the natural temptation of any religion is for the people of the masses to turn the deity into something that looks like who they are. We've always done it. That's the true terrifying point behind the book Imaginary Jesus, and it's the true terrifying, lingering point behind this question: what have you to do with us? Because we like our God neat up on a shelf looking like we expect. We like our God to be containable and malleable. We like God to be something familiar. We like it that way. It's controllable that way. There's literally a handbook in ancient Greek called Deities, and it's a whole handbook on what it is to be God or a God. And one of the rules is that you have to be tied to some elemental force of nature. Why is that? Well, it's simple. The reason really is in the handbook, in the actual handbook of what it means to be a Greek god. You need to tie yourself to some sort of element of nature because that proves that you're not controllable, you're not containable. You're tied to lightning because who can harness lightning? You're tied to fire because who can harness fire? You have to tie yourself to something that these people can't control. But even then, the Greeks found ways to make their gods more and more human, more and more like us, more and more containable, controllable, expected. You see, we reach a point in any religion where we start to expect certain things from our deities. And if they match up, we keep them. And if they don't, we toss them. It's the whole of human history. And in the complexity of that world, whether it's then or now, people harbor a spectrum of expectations, especially about Jesus. We expect him to be a moral teacher. And some people, for them, that's enough. That's all he needs to be. They can just box him in right then and there and take him home and be totally happy. They don't need him to be anything other than a moral teacher, just like any other moral teacher. And so they can put him on the shelf next to Confucius, and they're totally fine with that. That's all they want from him. Other people expect him to be some sort of cosmic therapist, and you can tell him all about your problems, every one of them, and you can whine as much as you like, and he will take notes and try to fix everything for you. And that's all they want from Jesus. It's just that. And they'll box him up just like that and keep him on the shelf just like that to pull down whenever they need him and to put back when they don't. And some people, they want Jesus to be more of a social revolutionary. They want him on the streets of Ukraine. They want him leading revolutions in France in the 1700s, or even in our own backyards in the 1700s. Some people want Jesus holding weapons and fighting wars. And some people really do truly want Jesus to be distant like really hands off, somewhere way out there, like he's there kind of running the big show, but not micromanaging anything in my own life. And that's where we'd prefer to keep him. I'm just curious. I know you all hate polling the audience, but I've got to poll the audience. Do any of you remember the song, I Put My Jesus in a Little White Box? I need to see the hands. I need the visual. Just there's two of us. I'm simultaneously glad that there's just two of us. The rest of you need to Google this and be absolutely horrified. This is an actual Sunday school song. I put my Jesus in a little white box and I keep him there. You can keep your devil in a little red box. That's the second verse. But there really is a Sunday school song about putting Jesus in a little white box and keeping him on the shelf. And you pull him out to play with him whenever you want him, and you can put him back when you don't. Distant until you need him. And we laugh and we think this is awful, but truthfully, think about this and do the awful self-introspective thing here and wonder, how distant do you try to keep Jesus when it's convenient for you? How close do you actually want him? What do you think he wants of us? A people who spend most of our time trying to tell him what we want of him. The difference between those two questions is night and day. Mark's gospel unfolds this revelation of Jesus as the Son of God, possessing authority over everything, even unclean spirits. And the unclean spirit, despite its distorted expectations, still acknowledges that Jesus is supreme. The narrative, you see, beckons us to embrace this truth, that Jesus is not confinable by our preconceived notions. Rather, he transcends them, and he reveals himself as the ultimate authority in our own lives. The unclean spirit asks, "What do you have to do with us?" We tend to tell Jesus what he can do with us. How bold of the clay to tell the potter which shape to fashion. That's what we do, though. Day and night, always. It's what all people have always done with deities. And amidst that drama, we have to recognize that Jesus defies categorization. He's not merely some historical figure. He's not just a moral exemplar. He is the divine Son of God with power over the spiritual realm and everything else. Good luck putting that in a little white box. The unclean spirit's recognition of Jesus' authority challenges us to reassess our understanding of who Jesus is. And it gives us the opportunity to align ourselves with how the Bible portrays the Messiah rather than how we would portray the Messiah. You see, the heart of the matter lies in that alignment, aligning our expectations with the true identity of Christ. Do our expectations align with this authoritative, compassionate, and transformative Jesus that we see in the Gospels? Because it is easy to reduce Jesus to something else, to fit societal norms or expectations or personal desires. But such reductions, they rob us of a profound, life-changing encounter with something so much more. Because no matter what you could expect Jesus to be, he always has more to offer. And as we try to navigate the complexities of those expectations, I hope that we strive to align ourselves with who Jesus really is, the way he would present himself. The transformative power of aligning our expectations with who Jesus truly is, it cannot be overstated. It's an invitation to encounter the living Christ, not the one up on your shelf, or not the one who does what you want, or not the one who dances when you say dance, or comes out of the genie bottle when you rub it 3 times. So much more than that. This Jesus, whose authority transcends our limited perceptions and expectations, is so much more than anything we could ever imagine. And now this question becomes intensely personal, doesn't it? How do your individual expectations align with this biblical portrayal of Jesus? And what impact does aligning those expectations have on your life? Because to truly accept Jesus as he is changes things. We sing the song just as we are. We're totally cool with Jesus having to come to us on our terms, just as I am, all 25 verses. But imagine a different version of that song where we say, just as you are, without my expectations or preconceived notions or who I think you should be. I'll take whatever it is that you are. It's never been a two-way street, has it? We've always done it the other way. We've always demanded that Jesus take us, sins and all. But what if we really decided to accept Christ the way Christ is, not the way we want him to be? That would change everything. It absolutely would. The unclean spirit asks a question that challenges us to confront that dissonance between expectation and reality. We consider our own expectations of Jesus, and we have to wonder if they're shaped by society around us. Does our view of Jesus come from our own personal desires of what we want him to be? Or is this some sort of genuine engagement with the Bible and how we read it? Where does our image of Jesus come from? And don't pretend that you don't have one. We all have one. Every one of us does. It's impossible not to. And it's easy to inadvertently adopt some limited view of Jesus, reducing him to a mere accessory to our lives, rather than the central, authoritative figure he truly is. But in light of this unclean spirit's acknowledgement of Jesus' authority, there is this invitation for us to realign our expectations. If, like the Spirit, we have expected only destruction, or if our expectations have been confined by our own personal desires and wants, then I hope that we can respond to this question as an invitation to broaden our understanding of Christ on his own terms. This story invites us to consider our own expectations of Christ and bring them into alignment with not only the biblical story and revelation of his identity, but who he is as we experience him on a daily basis in this world. It's an opportunity to surrender our misconceptions, our fears. It's truly a terrifying question. What if Jesus turns out to be something that you didn't expect or want? It's terrifying. It's an opportunity to get rid of our limited views and to stop saying Jesus can't do this or can't do that. It's a chance to stop adding disclaimers to your prayers. Do you know what I mean? You'll come to a point in life where you'll pray for something that seems too big. And to prevent any disappointment, you give God an out to save face. And you say something like, but only if it's your will, you can do this thing for me. And if it's not your will, then I'll try to come to terms with that. And that sounds so biblical, right? Because we're quoting Jesus. But what we're actually doing in that moment, 9 times out of 10, is saying, I understand that what I want for Christmas might be too big for Santa to pull off. So if you can't bring it in the sleigh, I'll come to terms. If it's too much for you to do this thing, well, we can figure this out. That's a limited view of the power of God. That's all it can ever possibly be. Because in that moment, what you want of Jesus and what you expect of Jesus are two different things. And it creates conflict. You want something that you think Jesus can't do. And even if you know that that's not biblically true, right? Jesus says things like nothing is impossible. Our own version of experience with reality has taught us that perhaps some things are too big and too much. And so we start to close that cage in, and some things become impossible for God. We've been trained to think this way, to do this, to act this way, to relate to God on these terms. But this question, from a demon of all people, the profound truth that comes from this demonic, unclean spirit is that you have to open your hearts to the transformative power if you encounter the true Christ. Because the only one in the room that day in that synagogue in Capernaum who was willing to do such a thing was the unclean spirit who asked Jesus, "What are you going to do with us?" Knowing that anything was possible. And that unclean spirit's question echoes across time, asking each of us, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" And if you would choose to engage that question, rather than just going back to your little white box, if you choose to actually engage that question, you should be intentional to align what you expect with the reality of Christ. That's the least painful way forward. I guess you can try to hold on to your limited expectations and try to hold them tight as you come face to face with the real Jesus. But something's going to have to give, and it's going to hurt. If you can find a posture of openness, of expecting nothing from Christ, and just having the ability to encounter him however he would show himself to you, you'll find amazing things. But you have to let go. You have to lose your life in order to gain life with Christ. You have to let go of everything you expect him to be to find out who he truly is. Otherwise, you might spend an amazing day with him on a mountaintop and see him in the glory of God for all that he is and say, "Truly you are the Son of God." But then as soon as you go back to work on Monday, you'll tell him to be quiet and get behind you. That's what Peter did. That's what happens if you try to hold on to those expectations of who you think Christ is rather than stay open to the possibilities of what he might be. The transformative encounter with the authoritative and compassionate Christ awaits any who would seek to align themselves with him. All of us. I only pray that our expectations can be reshaped by the profound truth of who Jesus is. That he can lead us into a deeper, more authentic relationship with God if we can just learn to let go of everything we expect him to be. If you're okay singing just as I am, practice this week singing just as you are. Come to God on God's terms rather than your own. You'll have a much better experience. You truly will. You can see the same drama unfold in the reading from Deuteronomy today. The Israelites came to the mountain expecting God to be one way, found out it was too much to handle, and rejected God. And said, we don't want to do this anymore. You need to keep your distance. And time after time after time, from that point forward, they do the same thing over and over and over again. They keep trying to tell God who God is. God says, "You don't need a king, I'm your king." And they said, "Yeah, but not the king we want. We want one that's prettier and taller." And so they pick Saul. It doesn't work out. He's awful. And so is the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And they get progressively worse and worse and worse and worse and worse because they want God to be something that God isn't. That's not a real relationship. That's just wishful thinking. We come to this table and we find the confrontation of who we expect God to be and who God truly is. This moment at this table is the opportunity to realize that God tends to not meet expectations. If you expected Christ to be raised up on a throne, you should have been looking at him raised up on a cross. If you expected Jesus to come and conquer with violence on a horse, you should have expected him to see on a donkey, riding in peacefully and being led to his slaughter in silence. Everything about the crucifixion story is the exact opposite of expectation. Nobody expected the story to turn out that way, and we lose that naivete as we grow up, as we keep expecting crucifixion. We know how that's the story ends. Come to this table and reclaim with fresh eyes the unexpected nature of crucifixion. The God who chose death rather than life. The God who chose to win by losing. The God who chose to do everything the exact opposite way you expected it to be. That's what we find at the table. And we take that moment to accept God on God's terms, crucifixion and all. And we eat it, we drink it, and I hope we go out of this place changed by it. reminded to continue to accept God on God's own terms, because truthfully, it's what we need. It may not be what you want, but it is what you need. And now I realize that all that was just some fancy version of eat your vegetables. Okay. But do eat your vegetables this time. Trust in who God is. Stop trying to make God into your own image and realize that this story began by God making us into God's image. Be shaped by that rather than trying to shape God into something that fits in your pocket or fits in a little white box. Come to the table and discover who Jesus has always been, always is, and always will be. Let's stand and sing.